I'm the last paper on the law section, and today I'm going to talk to you about heritage tree protection and its implications for nature-culture integration. This is a piece of research that is ongoing, and it's got two goals. One is a question of how we look at trees that have cultural heritage associations. So how do we define them? How do we identify them? And then how do we protect them once we've identified them? And it's this question of cultural heritage associations that I think is most interesting, whether they are individual trees or groups of trees or stands of trees. It doesn't seem to matter. They seem to get left out of the conversation or undervalued in many ways. So I've started looking at a number of different countries, the United States and Canada, the United Kingdom, which has quite an extensive inventory process, Australia, and Poland and the Czech Republic. These are not necessarily chosen case studies from a particular scale. They just are the countries that I've found the most information on at this point. And if you're interested, I've been summarizing the information actually for my students in my law class in this story map that is online, and it's at this website that I'll put into the chat at the end of the session. So there's a number of different approaches to identifying and then protecting heritage trees. There are, of course, registers of heritage trees that may be termed significant, champion, or heritage in different constituencies or different countries. These are mostly crowdsourced, and they're managed most often by an NGO, such as the Champion Trees National Register of the United States, which is done by American Forests, the Tree Register in Britain and Ireland, and Australia's Register of Significant Trees from the National Trusts of Australia. They typically don't have any controls associated with them. They're just identifying a champion, heritage, or significant tree. Legislation, when we look at it broadly, can happen at the state level or at local levels. In the United Kingdom, it's under the local planning authorities, the LPAs. In Canada, through the Provincial Heritage Acts. And in the United States, it's a pistache of a whole bunch of different approaches. There's some state legislation, not a whole lot. Most of it, because of the land use format in the United States, the land use law format in the United States, it happens at local municipalities, counties, or townships. So what you get in one town may be vastly different to what you get the next town over. And the fact of where that heritage tree or stand of trees sits can determine whether it is protected at all or not. And then there are those approaches that apply countrywide and are managed by a federal body and supported by federal level legislation. Now, federal level legislation doesn't necessarily mean that the trees are protected. And that happens in the United States, for example, where they're identified by the National Register of Historic Places, but the protection is limited only to federal actions. That means something like federal road building or development that has a source of federal funds. In Poland, the Czech Republic, you get some national level protection for certain types of trees, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Of course, there are strengths and weaknesses to all of these. The crowdsourced ones, particularly United States and Australia, are honorary designations. And they're identified and reviewed by volunteers, which means you've got a whole constituency of people going out and identifying these trees and then watching them and making sure as much as possible that there is some protection then afforded under laws and legislation. But the crowdsourced honorary identification doesn't really give it any protection.
You have
and
2
the
minutes.
other
You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. The other weakness here is that they're rarely based on anything more than size as a proxy for age. In Europe, the crowdsourced ones tend to have more heritage related to their stories. When we look at the regulatory, I'll look at it quickly in the United States, there's 3 layers: federal, state, and local land use legislation. Federal, you have the National Register. The National Register really hasn't been used for any tree designations, either individual or stand designations, since the last one I could find was 1990. The US state heritage registries are a little bit broader than that. And you can see 3 here from Los Angeles County: the Oak of the Gold Dream, which was identified in 1935, up to the Hay Tree in 2003. And they're placed on the state register, but again, don't have much control. In looking broadly at local regulations in the United States, as I said, they're a pastiche of different types of regulations, and some, even the local regulations, give very, very limited control to protecting those individual trees. Wanted to point out the traditional orchards designation in England, which is a fantastic level of cultural landscape designation. And then heritage fruit trees in the Czech Republic is very interesting. Maria Theresa identified them in the late 1700s. During the Soviet era, they weren't protected, and then they came back to protection. They really define the cultural landscape in many ways of the country and are particularly loved because you can just go down any road during fruit harvest time and pick whatever it is that you want. And these are federally protected. So what's the result in heritage management? Recognition is very, very uneven. Protection is less effective. Trees are generally not recognized in larger protected sites. There's a lack of inventory, there's a lack of identification of associations, and they're most often assigned an ecosystem value. So the nature side is recognized, not the culture side. And the heritage value is most often overlooked in these. And that means that as we're looking at designations from the World Heritage right down to the locally important sites, the trees are being taken for granted. And in some instances, that's not to say across the board, in some instances, as the fruit trees in the Czech Republic, we're able to protect those and begin a replanting program for those trees as such an important cultural landscape attribute.
Your time.
Thank you. But we still have a long way to go with trees. Thank you.